Welcome back to the Real Estate Standard Podcast, episode 28, where commercial real estate and Bitcoin collide. I'm your host, Tim Kotzman. Today is July 14th, 2026. I'm joined by Kenny Alves and Chris Drizga. Each episode, we break down how serious operators, investors, and developers stay competitive and profitable in the 21st century by examining commercial real estate through the lens of Bitcoin. On today's episode, we'll be discussing Bitcoin governance and BIP 110 with our guest, Soleil. But first, I'll hand it over to Kenny for an update on West Main storage stacking.
Thanks, Tim. As of today, July 14th, we hold 15.72 Bitcoin. And so far this quarter, we've stacked 32 million Satoshis, giving us a Bitcoin yield of about 2% so far this quarter. Our Bitcoin per square foot is at 22,653 Satoshis per square foot. We officially achieved Bitcoin square foot parity last quarter. What does that mean? There's approximately 97 billion square feet of US commercial real estate. And if you were to divide it by 21 million Bitcoin, all that will ever be, you'd get 21,649 sats per square foot. So we are now above that by about 1,000 sats per square foot. Our Bitcoin holdings now cover 3 years and 8 months worth of mortgage payments. Our digital credit covers 3 years, 3 months of mortgage payments, and together they cover 6 years and 11 months, almost 7 years of mortgage payments. West Main has purchased $1 million of Stretch Strategies digital credit preferred stock, and that's increased our net operating income by roughly 15%, bringing in $120,000 a year with a 12% variable adjusted rate dividend. It's return of capital. We received a digital rent payment earlier this week, or the other week, I should say, a couple of weeks ago now. And we will start receiving 2 payments a month now moving forward with, I think the next payment is tomorrow. So we'll be receiving $5,000 payments twice a month, 10,000 a month approximately. And just to kind of put that into perspective, that's about 35 10 by 10 climate controlled storage units for us. So we've effectively increased our cash flow without increasing our square footage, which is, pretty unique. The difference is there's no drag. It's 100% profit margin, where we're about 60-70% margins on the storage units. And yeah, what do you think, Chris?
It's all coming together really, really nicely here. We've kind of touched on it the last couple of weeks here, but I'm just going to reiterate it. We're finally at the point where we're seeing all these different pieces of this broader strategy come to fruition, right? Whether it's the treasury strategy with Bitcoin, the digital rent component, the solar components. We have the refi coming up here end of this year that'll get integrated into this broader conversation as well. So it's really kind of fun to zoom out and just look at the entire the entire property, the entire asset, and just really see what you've done here. To your point on some of those metrics, just understanding that you have coverage for almost 7 years of mortgage payments is staggering. And I mentioned it to you on our call the other day. I'm not aware of any commercial real estate operator in the market, regardless of size, that has, that level of stability, that level of reserves. So it's just really, really cool to kind of see all these different pieces that we've been talking about the last almost a year now really come full circle and start to work in a very complementary fashion. So those are my thoughts today. And today we have a special guest, one of the founding members of True North, the investment grade Bitcoin podcast. Soleil, welcome. Good afternoon.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I was super excited about this. I love the show, and my crush on Tim Kotzman is the least well-kept secret in Bitcoin. So can't wait for this.
Well, you might have to fight my wife over that crush. She's a big proponent of the open collar, no orange tie. I think she shared that with Tim on multiple occasions. So
He took the good advice then.
there you go. Yeah, well, thank you so much for making time here today. I know this, commercial real estate's a little bit different than what you guys cover on True North every week, but the current topic du jour, BIP 110, the soft fork, this entire conversation is just really taken over the airwaves. And what we try to do here every week is educate the commercial real estate crowd on not only the secular changes in the commercial real estate industry, but what is Bitcoin? What role does Bitcoin play in the commercial real estate industry? And how can you think about integrating it into your property or into your broader portfolio to not only just enhance the financial returns, but to make it more resilient and a better investment at the end of the day. So I don't want to steal too much of your thunder here. Why don't you give the audience a little bit of your background and just expertise and what we're gonna kind of cover here with BIP 110.
Yeah, right on. So I did 8 years in the Navy and then moved into an IT profession. After that, kind of backdoored my way into IT from the medical field, actually. And I was already a very, libertarian leaning before I became a Bitcoiner. And so when I saw how it was a very free market expression, it really appealed to me. And from there, I kind of, got into some of the trouble that many of us get into with, trading altcoins back and forth. And it was actually, I don't know, was it like a 20-hour series of Sailor on the What is Money podcast was kind of like what put the final nail in the coffin for me as far as being laser-eyed and just dumping all of those other altcoins and just going all in on Bitcoin. And and then I kind of I was already trading options in the stock market, and I tried to envision a future where every company was on a Bitcoin standard. And I thought, well, the stock market's not going away. So if I build a portfolio of just companies that have Bitcoin on the balance sheet, then I would have the potential of getting Bitcoin's appreciation plus whatever value the company could contribute as well. So I've done that, and then since basically retired from my W-2 job, and I just do that full time now.
Awesome.
That's awesome.
That's super helpful. I had a similar experience myself as as far as how I got here. And it was actually, it was strategy and the perpetual preferred products, right? The instruments built on top of Bitcoin, the cash flow streams built on top of Bitcoin that really got me to start being vocal in my industry.
hmm
Because it was, I tell people all the time, Bitcoin's CAGR could have been 200% a year. It didn't matter. There was such a large cohort of real estate investors that were so dependent on that cash flow every month, right, to cover their lifestyle, their expenses, what have you. So until you could solve for that, you were gonna your orange pilling efforts were gonna fall on deaf ears. So anyway, the perpetual preferred offerings really kind of changed that conversation, and obviously connected Kenny and I as well, and here we are, 28 episodes later.
Yeah, and
So
I love what you guys are doing because there's a lot of Bitcoiner stories of I used to own real estate. I used to have rental properties, and then okay, I sold 20, and now I just bought all, Bitcoin. I'm like, okay, well, that's great if you have this giant stack, but the rest of us have to earn a living. You know what I mean? Like, you have to be productive. You have to have enough money to pay the bills and stack some sats on the side. So I love integrating Bitcoin into the company and then just, making the company better instead of just kind of like taking your ball and going home.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
that's well said. Yeah, that's well said because um, we have definitely contemplated that idea. Just sell the real estate, and we've even run the numbers. And
Hmm.
there's a saying in commercial real estate. I'm sounding like a broken record here because when you're a real estate developer and you build out the property, you have a very low cost basis. So when you go to factor and to sell it, you have a big tax bill.
Hmm.
And when you compare the difference between refinancing and selling the property, you actually get more cash in your pocket at the end of the day by refinancing, and you get to keep the property. So it's more nuanced than rental properties. And that kind of frustrates me because online we see a lot of talk about real estate, just sell the real estate, but it's really from a rental property perspective, which is completely different than commercial real estate.
Yeah, I kind of see a future, and I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts on it as far as like, whether the 4-year cycle is real or not. It seems like it's at least on the business cycle or some kind of, we know it's a bear market, bull market kind of rotation. And, some people will sell at the top and try to time the market that way. But I see the ability potentially to, okay, when Bitcoin is up, now I can just use some of that capital to buy more properties. And when Bitcoin is down, you know, maybe you rotate out of properties or you simply just don't acquire as many properties during the bear market and you stack sats and you kind of well, for me as an options trader, it would be like a pairs trade in the stock market where I take two assets that are not correlated and I would rotate and rebalance between one. When one goes up, I'll sell a little bit off and go to the other one. So I kind of like that aspect of Bitcoin cycles maybe being conducive for building your plan around when to acquire, real estate, things like that.
Kenny, does that not sound like the three buckets that we just hammer on this show, or
Yeah,
what?
and yeah, I think it's exactly what we intend to do as we build out our Bitcoin position and our digital credit position. We see a future where, and I've been having a lot of offline conversations about this, where we build, say, a large 10,000 Bitcoin reserve, and we can use that to borrow against without having to liquidate it to go acquire real estate.
Hmm.
And you can bounce back and forth, and that's kind of what our Bitcoin per square foot metric really will help us with in the future. As that Bitcoin per square foot grows, we can decide, hey, well, maybe we should rebalance and allocate to real estate. But Chris and I both feel right now the distressed assets are Bitcoin and digital credit. So that's where the deal is, and that's where we're going to allocate our proceeds from cash flow, free cash flow, and then whatever financial engineering we can do and refinances. um, and we'll look to build out those buckets and then be able to use it as a dual collateral, and kind of go back and forth. So you kind of nailed the nail on the head there.
Yeah, when I heard you guys say Bitcoin per square foot in the last episode, I was like, oh, I cannot wait to tell my buddy about this. So my best friend from the Navy is into real estate, and he'll do everything he can to pay one off, and then he uses the equity to get another one, and he just kind of snowballs it in that way. But I've been trying to get him to buy Bitcoin for years, and he's been trying to get me to buy real estate for years. So you guys can help me out with that, and you can help him real estate bill me maybe.
One of the things with, to Kenny's point, I mean, if you're a developer, right, that uh, issue of not being able to afford to sell is very, very real. But to his point, it's different if you're just a traditional investor and you're accumulating cash flowing properties, right? So I think the Satoshis per square foot metric comes in handy for that latter group, that latter
Hmm.
category. So for your friend, for example, if he's got a portfolio of, whatever it is, a dozen or two properties, he can apply that sats per square foot metric onto those existing cash flowing assets and be able to ascertain which properties are throwing off the most excess economic energy and why,
Mm,
right?
I can't
So
wait to hit him with that one.
if I'm looking at my, my portfolio, and I know that, these 5 properties are, far and away the most sats per square foot, there's a reason why, right? Let's figure that out. Is it location? Is it quality? Is it vintage? Whatever it may be, probably a combination of the 3. Now, everything that's left, I have to have a very, very honest and objective conversation with myself and my partners. Do we hold those and try to optimize, or is it better to just sell?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And if it's sell, do we just pay Uncle Sam and that liquidity is more valuable? Or do we sell and do a 1031 exchange? There's a lot of different ways you can go about that. But that's something that I think the real estate community needs to really have an honest conversation about is, these properties that are built in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, they're economic and functionally obsolete, by and large, right? So it doesn't matter how many coats of paint you put on it. It doesn't matter, how you try to spruce it up. There are limits in what you're going to be able to charge for rent. There's going to be limits in what you can sell it for. And at a certain point, you hit a ceiling. That liquidity has more value to you than, trying to squeeze some additional gains out of it, right?
Yep.
So we'd love to orange pill your buddy when when he's available.
Yeah, that's I love what you were talking about, where you have to evaluate which properties are giving you the most, basically Bitcoin per square foot, because there's a concept called pruning, which you can use in all areas of your life, but kind of cheating and it's going forward a little bit. You can run a pruned node also, which trims some of the block space. But if you prune some of your investments that are doing less, a little bit more poorly, it also lets you focus on the investments that are doing better, and you can potentially even make them more efficient. So I love that aspect too.
Yeah. Well, that's a good transition point. Let's get into what this BIP is. And we have, Kenny, jump in here if you disagree, but I feel like we've done a good job of addressing and talking about some of the different issues in this space, right? For example, the most recent one has been the pullback in the STRC price, right? We've kind of explained to our audience what's happening, why it's happening, the mechanisms that the C-suite has at their disposal to rectify that, what the incentives in the marketplace are. We definitely have a responsibility to have an informed opinion on these different Bitcoin components, right? As we're trying to orange pill the commercial real estate crowd. But beyond having that, just informed opinion, we try to keep it more real estate focused. So when this topic came up a couple of weeks ago, we were kind of brainstorming, okay, how do we tie this into real estate? And I think you said it at the top of the hour really nicely. It's ultimately a property rights issue.
Mhm.
And the reason that the majority of investors love real estate is exactly that. So there's a really interesting correlation between the two property types, the two asset classes here, that are really going to resonate with those folks. So let's start there. What is BIP 110, and why the heck should we care about it?
Yeah, so I will take just a minute or so to go over kind of the history of Bitcoin. So when it first started, it was just Satoshi. And when it was just a handful of developers, the developers were also the people who stacked the sats, right? They wrote the code, they ran the nodes, and they were also mining. So incentives were completely aligned back then, in that if they wrote code that either favored the node or favored the miner, it was, every single developer bore that cost. And so there was a sense of fairness, and incentives were basically aligned. And since then, specialization has taken over, which is completely fine, right? Uh, a good capitalist society is going to be built in specialization, right? I don't need to know how to build my car. I just need to do what I do well. But what we have now is we have a group of people who are the developers, And then we have another group that runs the nodes, and we have another group that are the miners, and then we have people who just stack sats and chill. And it's completely fine to be in one or more of those groups. It's completely fine. You don't have to do it all. But what we're finding is that now the developers have their incentives, the node runners have theirs, the miners have theirs, and people who want to stack sats and transact have theirs. And so what we have is the people who want to transact in Bitcoin want lower fees. The miners who are doing the proof of work, they want to be paid higher fees. The completely fine incentives for each of those two parties to have that wish. It's the impartial node runner that gets to decide the rules and gets to kind of play the neutral referee between those two parties. And so what we've seen is that the legacy implementation, we call it core, they're the core developers, and there have been a series of upgrades that have built upon one another. SegWit, which allowed for there to be a discount in a certain area of the transactions. Then the Taproot upgrade built on top of that, and there was an inscriptions hack that was lodged to be patched, and they kind of said, "Oh, this is working as intended. This is fine." Well, that allowed spam to be introduced more easily and in larger size in the transactions. And then most recently with Core V30, they relaxed the op return filters, allowing even more spam. And so this was very contentious to the node runners who were seeing that their storage space was being used up by these non-financial transactions. And so there was a little bit of a rebellion against those core developers, and they said, hey, look, we're going to run our own protocol, and we're going to put BIP 110 on it, which would limit the op return filter back to what it used to be. And it's going to move it from the mempool policy, which resides on your node, and move that to the consensus rules. And then it's also going to patch that inscriptions hack that I mentioned from Taproot. Those are the two main functions that it does. And it basically just rolls back Bitcoin to the pre-Core V30 update, and also patches that inscriptions hack from Taproot. And that the goal is to reduce the amount of arbitrary data, which is basically called spam, which lessens the burden on the node runners. Their hard drives won't get filled up as fast, and people who live in maybe third world countries that only make a couple of bucks a day, they will also be able to participate in the network if we can keep the storage requirements very low.
All right, lots to unpack, and I think I can help like the commercial real estate guys a lot, because I'm gonna use an analogy here, because a lot of our listeners may be like ignorant to the definitions of what a node is and what the Bitcoin developers are. So I think if you look at it from a perspective of like real estate property governance, and what I mean by that, I mean like every town has a local zoning board or a planning board, and you also have the federal government that has certain things that you can and can't do with properties, right? Like, so that the federal government is basically like the consensus rules for Bitcoin in a way. Like, it's takes priority. Like, those rules have to be met first, and then there's kind of like discretion in a sense of local jurisdictions where you're beholden to your local planning board and zoning board, what is allowed on certain parcels of property. And what we have here is a rogue zoning board that has relaxed the rules of the neighborhood. What does that
Yep.
mean? That means like people could like build a strip center, and I don't mean like a retail shopping center. I mean like an adult strip
A
center
strip club.
next to a school, right? Like,
Yeah.
if you don't have zoning rules, like you run amok of the town, you could have all these perverse incentives, right? Like, you could have somebody from the zoning board, or like a bad actor, they're buying property that's zoned one thing, but then they're going to change the rules, and they can do things like, maybe before there was a height restriction, you couldn't build a certain height, and then all of a sudden they build four levels high, and they block the view of existing property owners that had a
Yep.
view of the water or the bridge or something like that. And so, like, let me just kind of back up a little bit here. So you have the Bitcoin developers, which I think are like the zoning board or the planning board members. You have the
Yep.
consensus rules, which are like the federal government, and then you have the mempool policy. What is the mempool? The mempool is like where pending transactions on the Bitcoin network sit, and they're waiting to be picked up by a miner. So what that can be like, a developer that has a property that they're looking to get permitted to build, right? It's like under construction. So you're
Mhm.
kind of waiting. So that's how I would relate that to real estate. And then the miners are like the contractors that you're going to hire to build. You're going to hire them to build the building that you got permitted by the zoning board, by the building inspector. The nodes are the property owners, right? So
Yep.
like you decide what you're going to build on your property. Somebody could say, "Oh, you could go build a casino on that land," and you may say, "Well, I don't agree with gambling. I'm not going to build a casino on my property. I'm going to build a church or something." Like it's it's
Right.
it's up to you what you want to build. So you like what we have here is developers trying to force you to build stuff or to allow others to build stuff that the community wouldn't agree to.
Yeah.
And they've been using this is the last thing I'll say, and I'll let you guys jump back in. What we're seeing here is an argument being formed that, oh, you could have always done this. You could always circumvent these node policies or these mempool policies by going direct to a miner, by going direct to, you know, and how would I compare that to real estate? I would say, well, you could always do that with real estate too. We had to do that for West Main Storage. Our property was zoned general business. So what does that mean? We had to get a special use permit and a variance to get it rezoned to become light industrial, essentially, to allow self-storage use case on that property. Now it's cost prohibitive. You have to go through a lengthy process. You have to um, get approval. You have to send out letters to your butters, the property owners next to you, and it's cumbersome, right? And what comes with that is extra rules and extra things, right? Like they may restrict your business hours or certain things about that. They'll say, "Well, allow this, but if you break any of these rules, we're going to revoke that special use." And that's what we've kind of seen with Mara Slipstream, which is a publicly
Yeah.
traded miner that created a way to for average node runners to broadcast their transactions that were not in line with what the community and the filters had upheld for decades, or over a decade, I should say. And like the case is being made, oh, you can just go behind the mempool's back essentially and go direct to the miner. They'll include it in the block. But what they're not acknowledging is that it comes with extra rules. Just like the person who got their property approved for a special use case, they have a special rule set to abide by. They
Mhm.
can't and so now Mara in this scenario is responsible, right? If they break the rules, they're gonna be the ones that have to answer to authority. Now,
Yeah.
if that were just lifted, there's nobody to point the finger at and say, "Hey, like, you're building these adult strip centers next to schools. We can't have that." And that's kind of what we got going on here with mixed use cases for the Bitcoin blockchain. They're essentially trying to allow some things that were previously, you could get around the rules by going direct to the miners. And now they're trying to say, hey, you could always do that with a variance or a special use. Let's just get rid of this special use permit because it's censorship. We're not letting people build what they want to build on their property. And I hope I did a good job trying
Oh
to
yeah,
use that analogy.
no, I love the analogy because I view this as a property rights issue, and the zoning board being the developers is perfect. And but the beauty of Bitcoin is it's a free market open source project, which means if zoning boards actually had to compete against each other to get, to be in charge, then like this bad zoning board that was kind of messing things up, you could actually just fire them and go with another developer. That's kind of what we're talking about here is the core developers have, written some code that a lot of the node runners don't like. And because it's a free market, they can just go run this other software instead. So it would be really nice if you could just fire the zoning boards that were making a bunch of, unsavory laws. And I also liked the part about the what you said about the miners, because imagine if the contractors were taking a bribe on the side to dump trash on your property. Like that's what's happening with spam. They're accepting that fee and including the spam in the transaction. And now the property owner, the node runner, actually has to store that forever. And it's not like you can just go clean up the trash and get it off of your property because Bitcoin is immutable. It has to stay there forever. Once it's a valid transaction and written into a block, it just stays there forever. So can you imagine trash piling up on your property that you could never clean up? So it's a problem, and that's the reasoning behind BIP 110 is to close some of those loopholes.
So BIP 110 is a proposed soft fork to roll back some of these changes or mistakes, dare I say.
Right.
What is the counter argument from the folks that want to stick with Core V30?
Yeah, so to steelman those folks, they would say that the arbitrary data is just ones and zeros, and so there's no native image viewing software on Bitcoin. So if you just look at the data in your node, it's just going to be strings of characters, right? There's no image there, but there's an entire ecosystem of people who are using those scripts, and once you decrypt them, they can be recompiled into images, and they sell them, they trade them, and there's a whole they call it non-monetary use cases. And so to steelman their argument, they would just say that all types of arbitrary can't be stopped because uh, I don't want to call them hackers necessarily, but clever, uh, clever people can write these scripts in very clever ways, and they can sneak these things into the code regardless of our best efforts. So it's kind of like a cat and mouse game. So those are the two main arguments that I see them saying, is that because all of it can't be stopped, we should just stop trying to stop any of it. And they would say that, look, these are just strings of characters on Bitcoin itself, and in order to actually see the images, you have to recompile them on another party's software. I reject those arguments because at the end of the day, I feel like as a node runner, you are agreeing to have a distributed data storage, right? But I think most node runners would agree that they are agreeing to store the financial transactions. If I send you a Bitcoin, then it's +1 for you, it's -1 for me. That's the only thing that the ledger should really care about. And yeah, beyond that, the miners are being paid to secure that transaction. And beyond that, we really don't need them performing any other functions, but they're kind of trying to pad their wallets a little bit, taking these. I kind of poke fun and call them, they're taking bribes really to include these other transactions. And I view that as a violation of my property rights, because a lot of people understand property rights meaning I have absolute use of this property. But the second part of property rights is you also have the right to exclude others from your property. In the case of actual real estate, it would be you can trespass anyone for any reason that you so choose. Unfortunately, because that transaction can't be, deleted or pruned from a full node. And that's what I alluded to earlier. You could run a pruned node and you could prune that data, but there are certain things that you can't do with a pruned node. So it's better to run a full node, and that data is there forever. So I would argue that by forcing node runners to accept that data onto their hard drives, that is a violation of the right to exclude anything from their personal property.
Okay, there's two kind of, I want to build on Kenny's analogies here with two of the things you just said, Soleil. So this arbitrary data, this spam, right? If we kind of equate this to the real estate conversation, this is somebody coming to your property and graffitiing it.
Exactly.
Right? And that graffiti is one issue, but the second issue there is that graffiti is not always the most pleasant or positive topic, right? It could
Sure.
be like, you got to just think, if people can put any kind of data on the blockchain, or they can graffiti your property with anything they want, right? Whether it's profanity or political persuasions, you can go down the line, and the worst of the worst is eligible.
Right.
I'll just leave it at that. The other thing I want to hit on is your ledger example, right? If you send me 1 Bitcoin, it's -1 for you, +1 for me, right? I think we can all agree that money is the primary use case of Bitcoin. Fair? Okay. In real estate, we call that the highest and best use. So
I like it.
premium values are achieved by developing the highest and best use on a particular parcel, right? It may be apartments in this situation, it may be warehouses in a different situation, but the way that you determine what you're going to build on a site is what we call the highest and best use. That is part and parcel to this money example that you just laid out.
Yeah, I love that, because I agree. And money should be Bitcoin's highest and best use. And so when they say, oh, well, these are just non-monetary use cases and that makes Bitcoin better, and it's like, no, you use it for its highest and best use, and using it for anything that's a lesser least best use is not addition by subtraction. That's actually making its highest best use less effective. You're going to have lower yields, and less acceptability for those things. And actually, acceptability is one of the monetary properties by which Bitcoin and all monies are judged. Right? There's a long list of them. There's fungibility, acceptability, max supply, all of those things. And acceptability, it kind of relates to what you were talking about with the graffiti, because if the graffiti becomes unsavory enough, then that money could become unacceptable by persons unwilling to trade with that money. So that is something to be cautious about. And to go back to the Steelman argument that the anti-BIP110 people use, and just say, hey, look, this is just ones and zeros. It's just a string of characters. And people who are looking at the images and going out of their way to look at the images, I can just ignore them, and they won't bother me, right? And the data won't bother me because I won't go looking for it. And that really doesn't work, because everyone gets to decide whether they want to participate in the Bitcoin network or not. And to the extent that it's less acceptable means its adoption is going to be hindered. So I think there was a quote that says, you can ignore reality, but you can't ignore the consequences of ignoring reality. And I would say that you can ignore spam, but you can't ignore the consequences of ignoring spam.
Yeah, I think I kind of want to maybe back it up and just kind of, I think we've got so far into the details here
Yeah.
that I just want to, for anyone watching, I just want to make sure that we can kind of back up and just put this in a kind of different perspective. One way that I like to think about what's happening here is op return is basically like the memo section on a check. You know, it's supposed to be used to write a quick little small note, what the payment was for, that type of thing. And in Bitcoin, the way it's used, in which people agree is normally for like a multi-sig type of.
Hmm. Oh, he's frozen for me.
Yeah, he's frozen for me too.
Yeah, I think I know where he was going with that. A lot of people do describe the op return as the memo, and I think that is a good analogy. And the issue is that on a memo, on a check, you can literally just write what, a couple of words. And so even with BIP 110 and knots, it allows 83 bytes in that field. So it's not like we're saying, hey, we're not allowing you to do anything here. And that amount of data is plenty of room for a hash. Anything that these people need to be able to write something very, very small in the memo section. But what Core has done with V30 is basically completely blown open that memo field to the point where you could put MP4s in there. And as you alluded to, you could put anything crazy in a MP4 video. And so I think that's an important distinction, is that I don't think BIP 110 is being unfair about this. Like, we're letting you have your memo, and you can scribble like a little hash in there. And if you want to use those for various development efforts, they're free to do that. We're not really just leaving them completely out in the cold.
I mean, the more I just personally looked into, the quote unquote history of op return, the more it just stunk.
Yeah.
It just is, to be completely frank, it stinks.
Yep.
And I'm not the most technical person. When it comes to all this, I typically defer to others on some of these really technical things. But you look at the history there. It's like, why, regardless if your Core 30 or 110, does not matter. Like, why would you not want to have a conversation about that timeline and recognize that there has been some less than ideal maneuvers made over that period?
Yeah, I think if you really wanted to not be very considerate, you could say that was a coordinated attack, right? That series of upgrades was building on each other. But if you want to be a little bit kinder and, not too accusatory, you could just say that they made mistakes. And either way, you want to be with that, we ended up here where the nodes are getting stuck with it. And I kind of want to go back to your real estate analogy again. I really just love it so much. And for me, the mempool seems like a freedom of association. It's like you're forcing me to communicate. It's almost like I have to bake the cake. Remember that controversy back in the day? Like, forcing me to relay these messages to other people is kind of like forcing me to bake the cake. But imagine that you had you were a team of developers, and you each had your own property. But since Bitcoin is a distributed data storage, every single person has to have the exact same property. Every single node is identical. It has all the exact same number of transactions on it. Everyone's chain is identical. So if you and 9 other developers had exact properties, and some of those property owners, decided to graffiti their property, so then you had to graffiti yours, it would be like, no, wait a minute, I didn't sign on for this. So that's kind of the problem when you have a distributed data storage. You cannot just let anyone do anything with your property. That would be, patently ridiculous. And so it's not that we object to rules at all. We don't mind some rules. And I think the problem that a lot of freedom-loving people have is that when rules come from a central authority like the government or from the zoning board, they can just do whatever they want and just command that it's true, and you're kind of stuck with it, right? And there's no consequences for them because they have a monopoly on that control and that power. But the beauty of Bitcoin is that since it's decentralized, everyone can contribute to the rules. If you want to learn how to code today, you can go start writing code for Bitcoin and you can start contributing. And that's how some people have actually joined it. They literally just were software developers and they just started contributing to the code. And then at some point, they were recognized and awarded grants to be funded to do that work. And so I think it's perfectly reasonable to come up with rules in a fair, decentralized way. And the spam, I call them spammers. You could call them anti-BIP 110, but I like to poke a little fun. And so the spammers will argue that it's a censorship issue or a permissionless issue. But I think one of the important ways to view Bitcoin, whatever you think it is, whatever description is being applied to it, put decentralized at the beginning, because it's not completely permissionless. It's just decentralized permissionlessness. Like if I wanted to send you a Bitcoin and send the exact same Bitcoin or to you, Kenny, but I wanted to send the exact same Bitcoin to Chris, that's called a double spend. And we have rules against that, right? So there's reasonable rules, and they are, we come to mutual agreement in a decentralized way to fair rules. And it's the best way to choose the rules. And, so I don't think that those counterclaims of censorship and permissionlessness are fair, because we have come to these conclusions, by cooperating and coming together and deciding as a network.
That's
Right.
that's excellent. And here, going back to the real estate analogy again here, because I just want to keep hammering this home from as every vantage point we can. Well,
We can do this all day.
We can do it all day.
I got
what
some
you
more I
just
want to make
described
after
there
you
is-
too.
What you described there, Soleil, is really the solution, or what we're trying, maybe not the solution, but what it is the opposite of what we have in real estate right now. Real
Mhm.
estate is broken from a handful of different angles. The one I'm getting at here is you have, it's almost a pay to play game in real
Mm.
estate. And what I mean by that is, if you're trying to do any kind of large scale development today, that development deal does not pencil alone. So the way that they get these development deals done is they go lobby the zoning board, the planning department, right? The local gatekeepers essentially, and they
Mhm.
negotiate different forms of tax credits. That is the only way that these brand new developments pencil in any way, shape, or form, right? And there's a lot of different a lot of different issues there. I mean, you're talking 50 years of monetization of the asset. That's an issue. You have layers upon layers of rent-seeking behavior and intermediaries. I mean, it's not just an isolated issue, I suppose. It's definitely multifaceted, but when you play it out far enough, you get to what you were just describing with the Bitcoin blockchain and the decentralized nature of it.
Yeah, it's I think it solves a lot of problems, being decentralized, and the ability to be able to fire the zoning board that's not serving the real estate community, I think, is a very valuable tool. And so that's what we're approaching. So there's a deadline coming up in August when the miners will have to either signal for BIP 110 or not. And that's the mandatory signaling period. And unfortunately, there are about 5 mining pools that constitute about, I think it's like 95% of the hash power. And so there's been a little bit of a controversy of why they picked 55% of the mining hash power is required to activate this as a miner activated soft fork. And the reason is because literally 1 or 2 companies could say no, and they would unilaterally decide the fate of this protocol. So there has been a little bit of criticism from the anti-BIP 110 folks that the the requirement for the miner activation is so low at 55%, but it really is a function of necessity of the issue that we have with mining centralization right now. Um, and so, but even if that doesn't happen, right? Even if the miners don't flip for the BIP 110 signal during mandatory signaling period, after about a couple of weeks, uh, the BIP will activate on the nodes, regardless of what the miners do. And that is probably the do or die moment about when we will know for sure if BIP 110 succeeds or not, because at that moment, their blocks will just start getting discarded if they're including spam that violates the new rules. And so the miners will have to decide at that point whether they're going to continue on the current chain or flip the switch and start protecting their blocks from being orphaned and flip over for BIP 110. So we will get resolution to this war sometime in August. And unfortunately, there's a little bit of uncertainty until then, but there is light at the end of the tunnel.
So it sounds like these network participants have the ability to vote with their feet. Would you say, bringing it back to the
Absolutely.
real estate analogies?
Yep. The nodes can do so, and so can the miners. Everybody gets a say.
Interesting. Okay. And is
And
there a
it's a nice check and
scenario?
balance. It's a nice check and balance because I mentioned the different factions, right? You got the devs, you got the nodes, you got the miners, and so there is a nice check and balance of power between those different specializations. So it's kind of a feature, not a bug, of Bitcoin.
Something I wanted to add in there and get.
Mm-hmm. Oh no,
I lost him again.
he's too sexy for this podcast. He's just overloading the bandwidth.
You know, he's been bringing the heat the last handful of weeks with the analogies and metaphors. So I don't know. Maybe the internet's rebelling on him here.
Well,
He's catching Sailor with all the analogies.
yeah, and let me say this because I've been thinking about real estate versus the Bitcoin Treasury Company investments that I've been doing, and everybody has, on True North, we've gone over it a million times. Like, look, Bitcoin is sovereign. You can put it in cold storage. You can leave the country with your seed phrase in your brain wallet, and you can start over fresh, somewhere else if there's a civil war, any kind of scenario, right? Or just resistant against, governmental infringement of your rights. Any of those things are a plus on the side of the Bitcoin as a sovereign money. But there are additional risks when you start investing in Bitcoin treasury companies, right? So you have to worry about whether the company is going to invest responsibly. Are they going to have a solid product? Different things. But there's one additional risk that BIP 110 has revealed itself to me, in that what if there's a war over the protocol, and you favor one protocol and the treasury company favors a different one, which has happened to me very recently, unfortunately. And so that is another risk. And it's like, okay, do I contribute my money and buy shares in this company when they're going to turn around and contribute that economic power to the protocol that I don't want? And so that has been a very difficult position that I've been put in most recently. However, if you're buying real estate, like, it's your property. You don't have to worry about the board of a particular company taking their company in a direction that you don't like. It's a more personal, sovereign investment type that is in the real estate's favor, compared to the Bitcoin treasury company space that I talk about basically every day. So that's a feather in your guys' cap for sure.
Ken, are you there? You want to jump back in before we keep on this thread?
Yeah, sorry about that. I keep losing internet connection, but I just wanted to kind of make the point about, we talked about the developers being more like the zoning or planning board. One key difference is if a planning board member or a zoning board member has a something that they have to excuse themselves. They have to acknowledge it, right? They have like something that could benefit
Like
them.
a conflict of interest or something?
Yeah, conflict of interest. Thanks. I was
Okay.
drawing a blank there. So if they have a if they have a conflict of interest, they have to excuse themselves. They can't sit in on that meeting. They can't vote on that meeting. And I can't help but notice the hidden agendas for some of these developers to implement this change. And this change would be like a zoning board meeting that occurred, and you had every member of the town come into the town hall. They're all standing there, they're all objecting, and the zoning board says, nope, we're going to approve it anyway. Right? That's what I mean by a
Mhm.
rogue zoning board, and that's essentially what
Yeah.
happened here. And I think we all agree that like the spam that we're referring to here is best fought at a local level. Like nobody's going to
Mhm.
know the town or city better than the residents of that town. That's why these local boards have like a lot of leeway on how to zone certain properties, right? And so we don't want like the federal government mandating every single town has to be run this way. We want each town to allow, and like that's basically each Bitcoin client, each Bitcoin software. And basically we only had one town square, which was Bitcoin
Mhm.
Core. It was like the de facto node software, right? So it's like basically everyone was in agreement that this is the way the town should be run. And now we have a contender. We have another town. We have, Knots as a second Bitcoin node or a second client that is still in consensus. They still have to, follow the federal government laws, but they have the ability to configure the mempool policy as they see fit, which is the local zoning ordinance. And
Yep.
the knots node is tightening the policy, so it's making it more restrictive, harder to build. We see that in real life, right? Like we see towns that want to preserve their town. Maybe like a lot of towns in New England, they want to preserve the house style,
Mhm.
the type, and they want to keep it nice. They don't want big box users coming in and building Targets and Walmarts and McDonald's
Data
everywhere.
centers.
Yeah, and so I think we all agree, the people on the core and not side, that it's better to have these rules enforced at the local level. But what we have here is we have a rogue zoning board that's just going
Mhm.
haywire, and they're allowing strip clubs next to schools and dumps next to farms, and like it's making no sense, right? To have a town built this way. And so some residents have opted to leave that town and go
Yep.
across the bridge and live with other community members that share their philosophies on how the property should be um, structured, and what rules should be in place to build on the property in these towns. And so you're
Yeah.
basically going to have two competing towns. It's still on Bitcoin, and so it's very confusing. And we may have to do some more episodes breaking this down. But like as Chris alluded to, it's important that we take a stance. It's very political, and didn't want to get into it, but um, it just felt like it was something you couldn't sweep under the rug, right? Like you have to kind of voice. This is kind of like when you see your town just, passing ludicrous laws. Like we're seeing things in New York City with the governor there, just doing things that nobody agrees with. That's
Yeah.
that's essentially the developers, in our situation here, doing things that the rest of the community doesn't agree with, and they are like forcing them to pick up and vote with their feet by saying,
Yep.
"Hey, we're not going to live in your town limits anymore. We're going to go to another town." And that's the cool thing about Bitcoin is it's not like you can take it with you. You can stand up
Mhm.
and you can take it with you. You don't have like you're not building on a fixed piece of land and that's the portability that you described earlier. So
Yeah. Yeah, when you have property, you either have to decide whether you're gonna abandon it or defend it if you're getting attacked. And, I some people have said that, "Oh, there's a risk for BIP 110," and of course, every upgrade has some risks, but it's also true that not making a choice or not doing anything is a risk, because when you are being attacked, if you do nothing, like, obviously, the attacks are going to continue, and they're probably going to get worse. So, I think it's the only time that these things are diminished is when you actually stand up and force force them to stop. Like people don't just stop taking advantage uh, voluntarily. You really do have to force their hand.
and I would
Yeah.
also compare it to like a squatter, right? Like a squatter takes over
Yeah,
your
for sure.
home and you're just going to let them live there and then like
No,
maybe the dogs in the neighborhood are coming over there and taking a leak on the side of your building and like you're just like, oh no, that's their right, that's their, and so you put up a fence and maybe they start hopping the fence and then you put some barbed wire on the fence
yeah,
and
and
you
It
keep
might
or
as well
well, tear the.
going.
electrify the fence while you're at it, Kenny. Just electrify it.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah,
And
you keep going. Like as a property owner, you defend your property. If you see somebody that keeps coming to vandalize your property, you put up security cameras. You find out who's doing it,
for sure.
right? And that's kind of like investigating who's behind these BIPs. And I don't think we mentioned it. It's a Bitcoin improvement possibility, right? And
Proposal, I think.
these
Yeah,
are
Proposal.
proposal or yeah, okay.
yeah,
So I think the Noster, the NIPS NIP is Noster improvement possibilities, and I got them confused. But these are who is bringing these ideas to the table, and we've seen that it's
yeah,
in my opinion, a nefarious actor that has tried to bring this up in the past years ago, and so like these attackers that they have they'll keep attacking you, especially like if you're not going to do anything about it. Like the guy that's tagging the sides of the buildings, like they keep going back to the buildings that where they get away with it. If they go to a building and
exactly.
they tag it and somebody comes out with a bat and chases them away, they might not come back next time. And so I think it's important that we defend our property rights
For
and
sure.
to you know i think I think we can kind of educate people along this real estate perspective because these are things people have to deal with. Even residential property owners have nightmare stories of their local zoning boards and
Mhm.
have to deal with this type of stuff. So giving like these different Bitcoin participants, putting them in the perspective as town hall, planning boards, property owners. I think it gives a lot of context and helps people think about it in a way that they can understand.
Yeah, every single one of these analogies just lines up so well because what you were talking about with the conflict of interest lines up perfectly with this story because, yeah, say you did go to the community event and you voiced your displeasure, but then you found out the board was meeting with the special interest groups behind your back, and then lo and behold, it just gets approved. And that's Hodlonaut did some research and he compiled a series of events and documented that some of the developers that were recruited were not, they were skilled coders, but they were involved in a lot of the crypto coins, right? There's a worse name for it. We'll just call them scam coins. But they came from that space and they weren't like real Bitcoiners and didn't really believe in Bitcoin and believe in freedom of money necessarily. And they were brought in um, in such a way that the funders of the grants from these private companies were also the mentors in the development community. So there was a little bit of a conflict of interest there in that these people were being brought into code and those grants were coming from companies. And then instead of them just receiving the grant and then going and working in core under, some diverse, uh, you know, group of other developers, they were actually kind of groomed under this ideology of let's turn Bitcoin into more of like crypto coin type of thing. And it, again, with the analogy with the squatter, that's what it reminded me of. It's like, okay, look, we are a private community of Bitcoiners. Like, we don't want Ethereum people, we don't want Solana people to live in our community, right? And so when they come in and they start squatting on the property and they start turning Bitcoin into these other coins, then we start to have a little bit of a problem. And instead of tearing the fences down like what Core V30 does, we want those fences maintained, and we want to be able to control how high the fence is, and how many volts of electricity we can juice that thing up with.
I think just a little bit of kind of add a little bit of color for someone that's not following this as closely as we are. But what Kenny and Soleil are getting at here is kind of the second or third chapter. This goes back to the very beginning days of Bitcoin, where the original developers, those that really came from a cypherpunk ethos, freedom loving, libertarian mindset, those guys are largely gone, right? Retired. Whether they got old and just went on to the next chapter in life, they got rich doing it, whatever, they're gone is the point. And when those seats or those folks left, what Kenny and Soleil are talking about are the folks that backfilled those positions.
Exactly.
The folks that backfilled those positions are obviously younger. They're, more, they come from the Ivy League schools. They're in blue cities. They run in the same social circles. They, often have this, very liberal, lefty, postmodern, perspective or set of viewpoints, which, to each their own. There's no issue with that necessarily, but it's really diluted the, what Bitcoin is, how it got to where it is, and why we all got involved from the beginning. And regardless of what side of this argument you're on, I just think it's disingenuous if you're not acknowledging that there has been a major change in the kind of the cultural fabric of Bitcoin, if you will. And that's one issue or one angle. The other angle, which you cannot ignore, is these developers run in the same social circles. It's centralized, right? If I'm a bad actor and I want to attack or co-opt the network, that's the easiest freaking place to do it.
Yep.
So I think that's where, let's call the 110ers are coming from. They have not lost their vigilance. They are being very skeptical. They are not trusting. They are verifying. And it's nice to see that we still have some of that ethos here, and not, it hasn't all been diluted or washed away.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Another real estate analogy. I think Bitcoin is going through gentrification. That's what we're witnessing, right? It's no different than a city of like misfits, with like people with more money moving in and improving what they consider improving the property, right? And the people that live there first may not agree with the improvements, and so it is kind of a like something to consider. Like the people that are making up the Bitcoin community are different than the past 10 years, and I think that's upset a lot of the older Bitcoiners, right? Like the people that used to live in Brooklyn before it became a hipster town, they don't have the same kind of feeling as the people that live there today. And so I think like some of the cleanup is good. I think having rules and regulation is good for um, just the industry, but how we're seeing some of these rules get put in place, like you mentioned, a lot of the older, more notorious Bitcoin core developers have kind of stepped down. And what we saw was a new developer that came from UC Berkeley get put into the lead maintainer position to merge this controversial update
Yeah.
and then retire, right? Like, so you saw somebody just that's brand kind of like young, right? Like was a kid when Bitcoin was going down. They grow up, go to UC Berkeley, and then all of a sudden they're kind of gifted, the red carpet rolls out for them to take the lead maintainer role. They make the most controversial change in all of Bitcoin's history, and then say that they're no longer interested in being the lead maintainer.
Yeah. Sounds like it's
Now
straight
you
out of
can't point
the.
the yeah. Well, like what they did was they made it so, oh, you can't point the finger at anyone here. We didn't do it. The
Yeah.
person that did it's gone. And what we're saying with the BIP 110, we're saying, well, we would like to fight this at the local level. We would like for this default mempool policy to be reversed, and that's like the main crux of the issue. Like if we're going to argue anything, we should be arguing why was this controversial change made, and why hasn't it been restored? And so if we can't get, the developers to restore this mempool policy, the only option we have is to like basically make this a consensus rule. And to your point earlier, why it wouldn't be considered censorship is because, one, it's backwards compatible with all the Bitcoin nodes, meaning it's a tightening of the rule policy. It's not adding a new rule in the sense of like a new feature. It's
Right.
actually making it more restrictive to comply with the rule set here. And we're basically like going to the top level and saying we're going to cement this policy that lasted for over a decade, and we're going to cement it into consensus rules, and we're going to make sure that everyone has to follow through on this. And it's not like rules for thee and not me, right? Everyone has to follow these rules, so it's not
Yeah.
censorship. It's like you know yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
Well, I'll just jump in here as my closing thoughts. Again, I said it earlier, I'm not the most technical person. I'm not coding. I don't know anything about cryptography, anything of that. But I kind of boiled this whole thing down to, the simplest, just the simplest way I could. And that was my ability to run a node at home.
Mm-hmm.
And when you kind of look at some of the components here, it has become harder, right? Like nobody can dispute that. I know from my own experience that, my node has slowed down, it's harder. And over a long enough time period, anybody should be able to run a node anywhere, anytime, any place, right? That is, key to the decentralized nature of the network. And I think it's incredibly important that we keep it that way. So, because if you don't do that, if that is not a, front and center, over a long enough time period, it becomes the AWSs of the world, the Salesforces of the world, the BlackRocks of the world that are running the nodes, right? And you end
Yeah.
up finding yourselves in the same damn position that we're in now. So again, you could argue and yell and give me all these different analogies till you're blue in the face, unless it keeps it very simple for me and anyone else, no matter where you are in the world, to run a node. I've made my decision.
Sounds fair. Final thoughts for me. It's kind of piggybacking on to what Kenny said about local policy being best. And so we are transferring that policy from local to the official consensus rules. However, this is only temporary for 1 year. And the reason why that's important is there's an optimal game theory that says that you should cooperate when you're being cooperated with. And when the other player stops cooperating, you have to stop cooperating with them until they start cooperating again. And so we can return this to the local level in 1 year. So I think it's just basically saying, look, we need a timeout and we need some time to come up with either a permanent solution, or maybe the squatters will just go away because we're hostile to them. And if they don't come back, then we can start deciding these things at the local policy level again, as you mentioned. And so this isn't saying where, in even the people who are arguing for censorship is like, okay, well, it's not forever. It's just, temporary until the people who are, defacing your property with with graffiti stop doing so and go to somebody else's go do that somewhere else, kind of a thing. So I do think it's important for this to be successful. And you can go out and start running your own node. You can spread the word. um, and I think we'll know soon enough whether this passes. I am bullish and optimistic that it will, and I think that this demonstrates Bitcoin's resilience and anti-fragility. So I'm looking forward to next month.
Very well said.
My closing thoughts. I think there's a lot of confusion out there. I think everyone should do their own due diligence and come up with their own opinion. And critical thinking is important here. You can't rely and trust the experts. You have to do your own research. I think one thing too that we didn't get too far into. I think that there's also some confusion on transaction fees versus storage fees.
Yeah.
The storage fees are paid by the nodes. So just because you paid the transaction fee to the miner to get the transaction broadcasted and confirmed on the network, they are not they do not carry the cost of storing that UTXO set forever, right? That's another kind of thing where we saw a lot of people in the treasury space make some statements that conflated those issues. And I just want to be
Hmm.
really clear that there's a difference between transaction fees and storage fees. We're like a self-storage company, West Main Storage, right? We're not, there's moving and storage companies. They're not the same. You
Hmm.
paid to get your stuff moved into the facility, and then you paid to store it in the facility. And those are two separate businesses, sometimes bundled together, but they're separate things.
Yeah, that's a good point, because a free market is when two people transact and they exchange value. But when two people transact, pay a fee, and a third party that is uncompensated has to bear the burden, that is rent-seeking behavior, and Bastiat called it legal plunder. And so hopefully we will rectify that soon enough.
I can't wait till we can all just go back to being friends.
I know. I agree.
Tim, you want to close this out?
Oh, Tim can't be frozen.
If Tim's frozen, that means we have to keep going.
We have to just keep going, right? Because now we're just stuck in the podcast forever. Or if we all drop, it's just him frozen on the screen.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we can just keep going and see if Tim comes back here. I mean, like, one thing that I did want to say was I feel that I feel like a lot of people in the Bitcoin treasury space, I'm not like naming names, and I'm not trying to take a cheap shot, but I feel like we haven't seen a lot of these people really lean into one side or the other. They've been making very vague statements, and some of them have been almost elementary in some ways.
Hmm.
Um, And that is a reason why, Chris and I talked offline and we were like, hey, we have to make a statement here.
Yeah.
And it looks like
Yeah.
Tim ditched us. He doesn't want anything
Yeah.
to do with
Well,
BIP
He got
110.
yeah. I mean, there's so many topics we didn't go down. I mean, I can go for another hour if you want to. But one of the other arguments that the anti-BIP 110 crowd will say is that the fees are the filter, and that the transaction fees that are bid for the block space when people want to make financial transactions, as long as those fees become high enough, then the spammers will be driven out, because the fees will disincentivize the use of spam. And I disagree with that because of what I was saying earlier about a free market transaction has to include and compensate all of the parties. And so really what you're talking about here is paying a ransom. It's saying, hey, if you don't want these unsavory images, if you don't want this graffiti on your property, then you have to pay the mafia a protection fee. And what's going to happen? That fee is going to increase. Like, the demand on that fee doesn't follow a traditional free market pricing. It's just going to escalate. And if you pay that fee, then you're going to be asked to pay a higher fee, and you're going to be asked to pay a higher fee. And if you want to imagine the worst of the worst type of image that could be on here, the appetite for these type of degenerates is infinite. So there is no fee that you can pay to that's not worth them getting you to store their image forever. So those are just several of the reasons why I disagree with the fees of the filter argument that the spammers come up with. Um, they really love to appeal to the fees of the filter argument because that's a free market thing that appeals to freedom money loving people. They like to cry about censorship, which is also not true, because it's simply just people coming up with rules in a decentralized way. Everybody gets a say in the rules, and everybody gets to choose what protocol they want to run. Same thing with permissionless. It's not permissionless. It's decentralized permission, and so they love to throw these terms around because anyone who is a freedom loving, freedom money loving person is going to take offense or associate a certain connotation to those accusations, those types of terms. So they love to use those buzzwords to kind of like get under libertarian skin. But when you really look at those accusations, I think they fall flat, and it really is kind of like a reverse Uno. That it's how does it say? They said it, sometimes the accusation is the confession, and I think that's kind of what's happening here. Is a lot of the things that the spammers accuse the BIP 110 people of is really them just confessing to the things that they're doing and trying to basically co-opt on sound money principles and libertarian themes.
And I mean, if you know your history to a reasonable extent, you know very well that that maneuver has been used over and over and over
Yeah,
over
exactly.
the millennia. So these are not new tricks.
Yeah, for sure. And the other thing too is they will point to they'll say, "Oh, Bitcoin is broken if 15% of the nodes can get this to pass." But there's a group of I think they're like, I don't know how even serious they are, but they call themselves the Threepers, the 3%ers, and they took the name because of the they did a study, and it's like only 3% of people in the Revolutionary War actually fought for the colonies, right? Only 3% of people like cared enough to actually fight. And so you don't really, because most people literally just don't care, right? A lot of people aren't going to run a node. They just want to stack sats. They don't want to bother with this controversy. And only the people who truly, truly care about it are going to be the ones that are going to be fighting. They're the only ones that are going to be running a node. They're the only ones that are going to be having podcasts like this and talking about it. And so you really don't need 51% or 75% to really fight for, defending Bitcoin. You really only need a small number of people who care enough to put their energy and time and effort into it.
And that's
Very
what you
well put.
call the the intolerant minority. And
Exactly.
Bitcoin has faced this before. We could maybe talk a little bit about what happened with SegWit in 2017, where there was large businesses in the space and mining companies that wanted to um, raise the block size limit, and ultimately they were, we say defeated, but I think we came to a compromise where
Yep.
where they wanted a blockchain with 8 megabyte blocks. Bitcoin was currently at 1 megabyte blocks, and we
Hmm.
compromised and settled at 4 megabyte blocks, which we have today. But I don't think anyone would argue that that decision was actually a good decision. Like, if we could
Right.
roll back the hands of time, we would say, "Hey, let's keep 1 megabyte blocks."
I
Like, I
would.
think there's a lot of people that think that that was a mistake. And the other thing that really aggravates me about this is it's not like there isn't a million other blockchains that they could do this with. There's
Right.
actually, like, the fork that happened from the SegWit that we were just talking about in 2017. There was a group of Bitcoiners that weren't willing to compromise on the 4 megabyte blocks, and they went with the 8 megabyte blocks, and that became Bitcoin Cash. Now, that was considered a hard fork because they changed the rules. It wasn't backwards compatible, meaning that node runners with software predating that fork were out of consensus because they
Yep.
had a rule that made it so you have to be within 1 megabyte blocks. And what we learned is when Bitcoin Cash went on their way to do these 8 megabyte blocks, they also did something in which just happened to us in the past 6 9 months, is they removed the cap on op return. They
They
blew it
did.
out from 83 bytes to 100,000 bytes. Talk
Hmm.
about like talk about an expansion, right? Like, and what aggravates me is how people will say this is, the the return of op return is what I like to call it. The return of op return isn't affiliated, or there's nothing, it's not like 2017. Well, let's think about this. First, they blew out the block size. Now they blew out the op return. What do you think they're going
Hmm.
to blow out next? There's already people that are pro Core 30, pro these types of changes, have already started arguing that the supply cap of 21
Yeah.
million should be revisited, and that maybe we shouldn't have a hard cap. This is
Yeah.
this is what happens when you let the rule set erode. When you don't stand up and defend the property rights, you just have these bad actors, self-proclaimed Bitcoiners. I don't consider you a Bitcoiner if you have a side stack of Solana or Ethereum, or if you think Bitcoin should be more like Ethereum in a data center storage system here. Like, you do not meet my classification as a Bitcoiner.
Yeah.
And I think, that there is a lot that we should be remembering from these past forks. And I'm sorry, I get all fired up on this stuff because look, I stayed silent for 11 years. I didn't say one thing on X. I was
Mm,
lurking in the shadows. I came out of the shadows about a year ago, and I made a commitment that I'll be here in the public for at least 10 years to defend Bitcoin. So I'm
nice.
kind of like I consider myself the second shift clocking in.
There you go. I could listen to your rant all day, but at least we got Tim back to close us out.
Yeah, nothing like your internet crashing while the live stream's still going. So
Tim, while you were gone, we agreed to go another hour, and we're just going to let Kenny rant
There you
for
go.
his entire shift.
all right, have at it.
We
No,
can close it down whenever. We
I
can
think you got.
revisit this in a.
No,
Yeah.
I'm just giving you a hard time, Kenny. I think you're exactly right on all those points, and going back to some of those historical examples where they've been used time and time again. I mean, you have to assume that the attackers are, funding both sides of this argument. So
Yeah.
when you're thinking about it from that standpoint, it just makes it that much more important to stay vigilant, to do your own homework, form your own opinions, ask questions, steelman the argument, have this rigorous debate that we did here today, and people are having throughout the industry. That is healthy. I said earlier, I can't wait till we can all go back being friends. That's the truth. But until then, we have to hammer this thing from every angle. We need to try to poke holes in it, blow it up, reassemble it to make sure that it's the best version of itself and the most anti-fragile organism in the universe.
Right on.
I want to do you guys mind if I open one last can of worms?
One more rant for the road.
Go.
Do it.
I got 10 minutes. Go. Run it.
So I think something that hasn't been discussed, and hopefully, we can see more discussion around this, is a user rejected soft fork. So
Yeah.
we haven't seen anybody specifically highlight which line of code they disagree with, right? It's just
And there's
been
only a few lines of
hand-waving.
code. It's really
Yeah.
small. There's just a few lines of code. It's not much.
Yeah, it's really important to also state that Bitcoin Core and Knots are 99% the same. Like, it's
Yeah.
literally 99.9% the same. And it's just a few lines of code that are different. But we haven't seen anyone from the opposing side, from Core 30, highlight exactly what they disagree with. And the reason why they can't do that, because they would clearly state that they disagree with the limit on the arbitrary data. So
Right.
it's like they come up with all these, like, the one thing that's so annoying, and we saw it with the FUD on the Bitcoin energy thing, right? Oh, it uses more energy than small countries, and this, and it's going to boil the oceans. It's going to kill the frogs.
Yeah, no, it's a perfect way to bring up the user rejected soft fork, because if right now they have plausible deniability because they say we hate spam too, we just don't like BIP 110. But if you come up with a user rejected soft fork and you basically say that we're going to run this protocol that says BIP 110 isn't valid, then you're basically admitting that you are fighting for spam. And so the cat's kind of out of the bag there. And I just don't see a URSF going anywhere, because where's the energy in trying to preserve those type of unsavory images? Like, you can't really build a movement or some kind of counter attack or counter offensive around that. Like, is even the people who are opposed BIP 110 also say they hate spam. So I think that a user rejected soft fork doesn't really work out for them very well.
And
Well-
I mean, you're going to get to the point too, Soleil, where the attorneys at these these large treasury companies are going to say, whoa, 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 there's
Yep.
just too much litigation risk here, to be running a chain that's got unsavory images on it. That
Yeah.
will kick in. It's only a matter. The question is when.
Yeah, I
So-
agree.
So, like, a lot of people are saying, oh, we're going to sell our BIP 110 coins, and we're gonna buy Core coin. And the reason I bring the rejected soft fork up is you can't have replay protection without a user rejected soft fork. What does
Right.
replay protection mean? That means if you spend on one chain, it could have unintended consequences on the other chain. And the only way that you can make sure that these that you're not going to move Bitcoin from one chain and it's going to have an unintended effect on the other chain is, if you're on the Core side, you would have to make sure that your transactions have larger than 83 byte op return. But if you're on the BIP 110 side, there's no real, like, Core nodes are going to agree with all BIP 110 transactions. There's nothing that BIP 110 can do to offend Core. And
Right.
I think, like, people kind of are lost around that. Like, so worth mentioning, but I know we've been going on for almost an hour and a half here, so want to respect everybody's time. And Tim is back; he can close us out.
Yeah, this was great. Thanks for having me on, guys.
Yeah, thanks, Soleil.
Thanks for
I'm
coming.
going to try this again. That's it for today's episode. If this conversation was helpful and useful, please share it with a partner, a client, someone making decisions in the market. New episodes of the Real Estate Standard drop weekly. Until next time, stay disciplined, think long term, and stack Satoshis. This is the Real Estate Standard. If you enjoyed today's conversation and you own commercial real estate, we'd encourage you to think about how these broader shifts might impact your own property over the next decade. Many owners are starting to reconsider how they structure their balance sheets, manage capital, and position their assets for the future. If you'd like to explore how some of these ideas might apply to your own situation, you're welcome to reach out.